It was just a brush of her hand, but when she whispered, "Stay, just for me," I knew this night would change everything. I hadn't planned on staying long that night. It was supposed to be just another quiet gathering at my friend's house, some music playing low, a few neighbors drifting in and out of conversation, the clink of glasses in the kitchen. Nothing out of the ordinary. But even before she arrived, I felt a strange anticipation I couldn't quite name. The evening light filtered through the tall windows, turning everything a warm, honeygold. The air smelled faintly of roasted garlic and fresh bread from the kitchen. People laughed in the background, though none of it seemed to hold my attention for long. I didn't know what I was waiting for, until the front door opened. She stepped in as though she didn't need to announce herself. Her presence carried its own quiet gravity. She was in her early 40s, though there was something about the way she carried herself that made her appear timeless, a mixture of poise and unstudied ease. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked into tailored dark jeans, nothing flashy, but on her it looked refined. Her hair framed her face in gentle waves, catching the light with every movement. The first thing I noticed wasn't how she looked, but the silence that seemed to ripple through me when she entered. As though I'd been waiting for something I didn't realize until now. She smiled briefly as she greeted my friend's mother, her laugh warm and effortless, like she'd been part of the family for years. I tried not to stare, but it was difficult. She had that kind of presence, not loud, not seeking attention, but drawing it anyway. When she walked past me in the hallway, balancing her handbag on her shoulder, the faintest trace of her perfume drifted my way, floral but grounded, like jasmine touched with something deeper. "Excuse me," she said gently as she passed, her hand brushing against my shoulder in the narrow space. Just a simple, ordinary touch. But it left a trail of warmth spreading across my skin, as if my body didn't quite want to forget it. I nodded, mumbling something polite in return, though my voice sounded different to my own ears, softer, less certain. I watched as she disappeared into the kitchen, her laughter mingling with the others, her presence filling the room without trying. The rest of the night should have unfolded like any other, small talk, casual company, nothing more. But every so often, I'd catch glimpses of her, the curve of her hand holding a wine glass, the way her eyes softened when she listened to someone speak, the quiet tilt of her head when she smiled. Something inside me shifted, subtle but undeniable. I didn't yet know why, or what it meant, but I knew one thing with startling clarity: this was no ordinary evening. And she was no ordinary guest. The air in the kitchen felt cooler than in the living room, lamps casting soft, golden pools of light, the wood of the cabinets giving off its familiar warm scent. A kettle whistled quietly somewhere, and the hum of the refrigerator was a gentle backdrop to the conversations drifting around us. I was leaning against the counter, a glass of water in hand, trying to follow a joke spoken 2 tables over. She entered with a wine glass filled, her movements unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. The clink of her glass on the countertop caught my attention. She smiled, offering me a refill of water, as though noticing I'd lost interest in everything else but watching her. "Are you sure?" I asked, lifting my glass. Her smile was small but kind. "Yes, thank you." She reached over and passed the pitcher. Our hands touched lightly around the glass rim, the touch lasting maybe a heartbeat, or perhaps less. Still, it felt like something meant. She leaned on the opposite side of the counter, body turned slightly toward me, hips angled just enough that I could see how her blouse fell over her jeans in soft folds. Her voice was calm when she spoke, curious, asking about what I studied, what I hoped for, the things I wasn't used to sharing with strangers, or almost strangers. She asked with genuine interest. I stuttered when I realized she was still listening, really listening. Her eyes were warm pools of concern when I spoke of nights when I felt aimless, those summers the first drifted trying to find my path. I talked more than I expected to, about books I loved, about regrets I carried. She nodded. Occasionally she paused, as if choosing her words, as if choosing to be present. At one point, a gust of wind came through the open window. Curtains fluttered. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and the light caught the curve of her neck. I noticed the softness in her skin, the slight tension when she shifted. The moment was so ordinary, so small, but it felt charged, as though the world narrowed to just us in that kitchen, the rest of the room dissolving. Laughter echoed from another room as someone dropped a plate. We both looked away, and when I turned back, our eyes met. Her gaze held mine a little too long. My throat went dry, but she didn't pull away. She offered a smile, not embarrassed, just patient. Words about the weather, idle comments about the gathering, drifted between us two, yet none of them mattered. What mattered was the space between us, humming with something unspoken. The steady rise and fall of her breath. The way she tilts her head when curious. The faint tremor in my hand as I raised my glass, trying to appear calm. In that kitchen, the ordinary felt sacred. Her confidence was there, in how she stood, in how she spoke, steady feet, soft voice. But also a vulnerability, in the way her eyes momentarily slipped, as though she wondered if she was too much or too little. She was beautiful, not just by first glance, but in moments like this, open, attentive, quietly real. And in me, a tension grew, between wanting to leave, wanting to stay, wanting to keep talking, wanting everything to stay this one magnificent tension, as though this calm, curious closeness already meant something more. By the time the last of the neighbors had left, the house had settled into a hush. The distant sound of a car engine faded into the night, and only the tick of the wall clock kept steady rhythm. My friend had gone upstairs long ago, leaving the downstairs dim and quiet. I should have left too, but somehow I hadn't moved. The living room light was low, a single lamp in the corner throwing a soft amber glow across the couch. The cushions looked impossibly inviting, as if waiting for someone to sink into them. She walked in with her wineglass nearly empty, barefoot now, her heels abandoned at the edge of the rug. Something about that detail, her shoes set aside, her steps softer, made the moment feel different, stripped of formality. I sat at the far end of the couch, trying to appear casual, though my chest tightened with every breath. She lowered herself onto the cushions beside me, not directly beside me, but close enough that the space between us felt alive. The faint rustle of fabric whispered as she adjusted, one leg tucked beneath her, her body angled just slightly toward mine. "You're quiet," she said after a pause, her tone gentle, curious rather than critical. I smiled faintly. "I guess I'm better at listening." She tilted her head, studying me as if that answer revealed something important. The lamplight caught the lines at the corners of her eyes, not harsh, not weary, but the kind that came from years of laughter and late-night conversations. She had lived more life than me, that much was obvious, but the way she looked at me made me feel less like a boy and more like someone who mattered. We spoke in low voices, the kind you use without realizing it when a room feels too intimate for volume. She asked me about my family, about the places I wanted to see, the kind of work I dreamed of doing. Her questions weren't idle. She listened like my words carried weight. And when she spoke, I leaned closer, not wanting to miss a syllable. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, though softer now, mixed with the woody scent of the couch fabric. Every now and then, her knee brushed against mine. Each time, I thought she might move away. But she didn't. The contact lingered just enough to stir something restless in me, something both thrilling and terrifying. When our conversation slowed, silence filled the spaces between us, not awkward, but thick with meaning. I felt her presence not just beside me, but around me, like the glow of the lamp itself. My pulse raced, though outwardly I remained still. I wanted to believe the closeness was an accident, that this was nothing more than two people sharing a couch. But the truth pressed in on me. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A quiet, deliberate choice neither of us named. And in that soft living room glow, the night seemed to shift. What had begun as casual company was becoming something far more difficult to ignore. For a while, we just sat in that gentle half-darkness, our voices trailing off into comfortable pauses. The lamplight painted her features in soft amber, the shadows deepening the thoughtful expression in her eyes. She swirled what little wine remained in her glass, staring at it as if gathering the courage to speak. "It's strange," she said finally, her tone low, almost confessional. Nights like these, they remind me how quickly the house empties. I glanced at her, unsure how to respond. She gave a small laugh, though it carried no real humor. You spend years building your life around people, children, routines, expectations. And then suddenly it all shifts. My daughter's hardly home anymore. I'm happy for her, of course, but sometimes I wonder where that leaves me. Her words hung in the air. There was no self-pity in them, only honesty, the kind people usually hide beneath polite conversation. I felt something inside me tighten, not pity, but recognition. She wasn't just someone's friend or someone's mother. She was a woman who'd given much of herself away and was quietly asking what was left for her. I set my glass down carefully, buying a moment to gather my thoughts. That must feel lonely, I said softly. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a second I thought she might look away. But she didn't. She held my gaze, her vulnerability stark, unguarded. Lonely, she repeated, her voice a whisper now. Yes. That's the word I don't like admitting. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was tender. She exhaled slowly, and I watched the rise and fall of her shoulders, the way she leaned back just slightly as though the admission had cost her something. On the cushion between us, her hand rested palm down, fingers slightly curled. It wasn't an invitation, not exactly, but it wasn't closed off either. My own hand edged closer without my realizing it, my fingers brushing against the edge of the fabric near hers. The space between us narrowed until there was only a breath's distance. I didn't touch her, not fully. But I felt the warmth radiating from her skin, close enough to know how easy it would be to close that gap. My pulse hammered in my ears, and yet the moment wasn't about desire, it was about trust. About her daring to let someone see her not as polished or untouchable, but as human. You ever feel, she said after a pause, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as though speaking to herself, like everyone expects you to be stronger than you are? I nodded slowly. All the time. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. Then maybe you understand. I did. More than I could say. And in that instant, I realized something had shifted. She wasn't just sharing stories to pass the time. She was sharing herself, piece by piece, trusting me to carry some of the weight she'd kept hidden from everyone else. The air between us seemed charged, fragile, but deeply alive. I shifted forward on the couch, pretending to check the time on my phone. It was late, much later than I'd planned to stay. My friend was long asleep upstairs, the house hushed, the only sound the soft hum of the air vent. I knew I should stand, thank her politely, and leave before the night stretched into something harder to explain. But as I started to rise, she moved. Not much, just a small, almost absent gesture. Her fingertips brushed against the back of my hand, so lightly I might have thought it was accidental if not for the deliberate way her touch lingered. I froze. The phone slipped slightly in my grasp, forgotten. Her touch wasn't bold, wasn't insistent. It was hesitant, trembling at the edges, but there was meaning in it. My skin warmed instantly under her fingertips, the soft pressure traveling up my arm like a current. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact, every other sound and thought falling away. I turned my head slowly, almost afraid of what I'd find in her expression. She was watching me, her eyes steady, searching, filled with something I couldn't quite name, longing, perhaps, or fear, or both at once. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but hesitated. Finally, in a voice so quiet I might have missed it if I weren't holding my breath, she whispered, "Stay, just for me." The words settled into me with a weight I hadn't expected. They weren't a command. They weren't even a request in the ordinary sense. They were something more fragile, an unveiling, a hope she hadn't dared to voice until now. My chest tightened. I didn't answer right away. My thoughts ran wild, the difference in our ages, what people would think, whether I was misreading everything. But none of those thoughts seemed to matter as much as the woman beside me, her fingers still resting lightly on mine, her heart laid bare in those 4 small words. I could feel her breath, slow but unsteady, as though she was bracing herself for rejection. The silence stretched, thick and trembling. I had never wanted to break silence less. I glanced down at her hand over mine, the way her thumb brushed the skin near my knuckles in a tiny, unconscious circle. A gesture so tender it made my throat ache. My voice cracked slightly before I steadied it. Are you sure? Her eyes softened, shimmering under the dim lamp. She gave the faintest nod, her smile tinged with something both vulnerable and grateful. Yes, she murmured. Just for tonight. Just stay. And in that moment, every excuse I had dissolved. Not because of desire, not because of impulse, but because saying yes felt like the only kind of truth I could give her. Her hand pressed just slightly firmer against mine, as if to anchor me there. And without moving an inch closer, without kissing or embracing, we had already crossed into something that felt irreversible. The night had changed. And so had we. For a long time after she whispered those words, "Stay, just for me," I sat utterly still, caught in the quiet thunder of my own heartbeat. The lamp cast a circle of light that seemed too intimate, too revealing. Her hand still rested lightly on mine, her thumb tracing the faintest of movements, like a question left unanswered. I could have stood. I could have broken the tension with a polite excuse and the safe distance of the door. A part of me thought about it, about what was expected, about what might be said if anyone knew. But her presence beside me felt like gravity, a pull I didn't want to resist. I shifted slowly, turning back toward her. She didn't speak, but her shoulders eased, as if even that small movement gave her hope. The air between us was thick with silence, yet it wasn't empty, it was alive, waiting. I don't want to make a mistake, I said finally, my voice low, uncertain. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, I thought I'd see regret or hesitation. Instead, I saw something rawer, gratitude, perhaps, that I'd given voice to the very fear she carried herself. Neither do I, she whispered. But sometimes it's lonelier to keep pretending. The vulnerability in her tone cut through me. She wasn't asking me for promises, wasn't asking me to rewrite her life or mine. She was asking me to stay in this moment, here and now, because it mattered to her more than she could say. I leaned back into the couch slowly, a decision made not with grand gestures but with quiet resolve. The leather creaked softly beneath us as I settled in again. Her exhale came almost instantly, a soft, shaky breath she must have been holding. She tilted slightly, her shoulder brushing against mine, not claiming, just resting, as though she'd finally allowed herself to lean. Her hand remained on mine, but now it shifted with greater certainty, her fingers curling gently between my own. The warmth of her skin seeped into me, steadying, grounding. It wasn't the heat of desire but the comfort of being chosen, of being trusted. We spoke little after that. The words we'd already exchanged had said more than enough. Instead, we sat together in the hush of the night, our closeness speaking for us. I could feel the rhythm of her breathing slow, the weight of her head tilting ever so slightly toward me, as though surrendering to rest. I stared ahead at the dim outline of the bookshelf across the room, my thoughts restless but my body calm. I hadn't just decided to stay, I'd decided to see her, to hold space for the part of her that rarely showed itself. Her fingers brushed over mine once more, this time not tentative but deliberate, a small circle traced by her thumb that felt like both a thank you and a confession. And though the world outside would never know, in that quiet decision, I felt something undeniable settle between us, something fragile, precious, and wholly ours. Time seemed to slip away unnoticed after that. The house, once filled with chatter and footsteps, now felt like a world that belonged only to us. The quiet was not empty but intimate, the kind of silence that settles between two people who no longer feel the need to fill every pause. We spoke in hushed tones, our voices softened by the hour. She told me small stories, about the first apartment she'd ever lived in, the time she tried to paint her kitchen walls and ended up with streaks everywhere, the silly things that made her laugh when no one was watching. I listened, drawn in not just by her words but by the way she shared them, unguarded, almost playful, like the heaviness from earlier had lifted, if only for tonight. Sometimes, our laughter rose just enough to echo in the stillness. Each time it did, we'd pause, as if afraid of breaking the spell. And then we'd smile at each other, a quiet acknowledgement that this night was different from all the others we'd known. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, not demanding, just there, like it had always belonged. I could feel the weight of her hair brushing against my arm, the steady rhythm of her breath warming the fabric of my sleeve. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. But it was real. Real in a way that pressed into my chest and stayed there. I found myself wanting to remember everything. The way her fingers rested over mine, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the warm glow of the lamp that softened her features into something almost timeless. I wanted to hold on to every detail because I knew nights like this didn't come often. Eventually, the clock ticked louder in my mind, reminding me that the night had to end. I shifted slightly, and she stirred, lifting her head from my shoulder. For a moment, she looked at me as though trying to memorize me, too. "You should go," she said softly, though her voice carried reluctance. I nodded, though neither of us moved right away. Finally I stood, and she rose with me, walking me slowly toward the door. The hallway felt cooler, the night air waiting just beyond. She reached for the door but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she turned to me, her eyes shimmering with something I couldn't name. Her hand lifted, almost hesitant, before her fingers brushed gently against my cheek. It was the lightest of touches, but it lingered, warm and steady. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. "For staying." There was nothing more to say. I stepped out into the night, the cool air a sharp contrast to the warmth I carried inside. As I walked away, I knew this wasn't the start of a fairy tale, or something meant to be explained. It was simpler, deeper, a night of being seen, of belonging, of choosing to stay when it mattered. And somehow, I knew it would echo in me far longer than I'd ever admit. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more slow burn romances. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if someone whispered, "Stay, just for me"?